Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a world that is practically invisible to the average person, but absolutely crucial to our daily lives. We are diving into the highly regulated world of pharmaceutical manufacturing to see exactly how the World Health Organization ensures the medicines we rely on are consistently safe and effective.
But before we get deep into the regulations, just think about it for a second. How do you actually know the medicine you're taking is safe? Consider the sheer scale of global trust placed in pharmaceutical supply chains. How do we guarantee a drug manufactured halfway across the globe hasn't been cross-contaminated or degraded in transit? Well, that massive level of trust relies entirely on an invisible, completely non-negotiable infrastructure of rules.
So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be looking at the quality assurance umbrella, the core principles of GMP, managing risks in manufacturing, the people behind the process, validating facilities and equipment, and finally, quality control and release. We'll work our way from the macro-level systems all the way down to the micro-level daily operations.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the quality assurance umbrella.
To really wrap our heads around these overarching systems, we gotta look at where it all started. The WHO's guidelines didn't just appear out of nowhere. They've been continually evolving. We're talking about a first draft way back in 1967, which was quickly accepted by the World Health Assembly in '68. Since then, it saw a major revision in 1975 and a really deep overhaul in 1992 to establish the whole philosophy of quality management, just to keep up with the ever-growing complexities of modern medicine.
Think of the Pharmaceutical Quality System, or PQS, as the biggest doll in a set of Russian nesting dolls. It's the absolute backbone of manufacturing. And the fascinating part is that it requires active participation from senior management all the way down to the factory floor. Actually, senior management holds the ultimate responsibility here. They have to ensure the quality system is fully resourced, clearly communicated, and implemented flawlessly throughout the entire organization.
Now, here's a distinction that trips up a lot of people in the industry: quality assurance versus quality control. Quality assurance is the whole shebang. It's the entire overarching system ensuring a product is actually fit for its intended use. Quality control, on the other hand, is just one localized component inside that system. It refers specifically to the rigorous lab stuff, the sampling, the testing, and the clearance that ensures the materials actually conform to the established specifications.
Moving right along to Section 2, core principles of GMP.
So good manufacturing practice, or GMP, is basically the next nested doll living right under the QA umbrella. And it's literally there to prevent the kind of terrifying risks you just can't test away at the very end. You can't rely on catching a mistake in the final lab test. We're talking about preventing things like a mix-up, where a drug is mislabeled, or cross-contamination, which is when you accidentally transfer unexpected active ingredients from one batch to another.
Listen to this phrasing directly from the WHO guidelines. Haphazard operations cannot be permitted. It really anchors these somewhat dry technical standards back to the human element, doesn't it? There's absolutely zero room for guesswork or corner cutting when human lives are on the line. Every single action taken in that facility must be highly intentional and meticulously documented.
To enforce that standard of zero guesswork, GMP lays down the law with some strictly non-negotiable requirements. Every step of manufacturing has to be clearly defined and proven to consistently deliver high-quality products. Manufacturers have to provide more than enough clean room space, hire highly trained personnel, and use heavily scrutinized, pre-approved written procedures. Nothing, and I mean nothing, happens by accident.
Which brings us to Section 3, managing risks in manufacturing. Quality risk management, actually let's just call it QRM, is definitely not about going with your gut or guessing what might go wrong. It is a highly formal, scientific loop of hazard identification, risk analysis, and risk control. It demands continuous communication and review to guarantee that any risk evaluation is based on concrete science and ultimately links straight back to protecting the patient.
And this isn't just theoretical paperwork either. These risk matrices have real-world regulatory consequences. National regulatory authorities use a strict risk-based approach to figure out how often a manufacturing site needs to be aggressively inspected. If a site gets tagged as a critical or high-risk category, maybe because of a past compliance issue or because they make highly potent drugs, their inspection frequency shoots way up. The resources go exactly where the danger is highest.
Let's pivot a bit to Section 4, the people behind the process.
Because at the end of the day, systems don't run themselves, right? People do. And a foundational rule of GMP is the deliberate separation of power. To prevent any conflict of interest between producing a drug incredibly fast and producing it safely, the head of quality control must be totally independent from the head of production. Production's job is just to follow the documents and make the product. QC's job is to independently evaluate it and make the final call on whether it's safe to release or if the whole batch has to be scrapped.
To make sure that separation of power actually works, every single task has to be explicitly written out in a job description. You know that whole, "Oh, I thought you were handling it" excuse? Yeah, that doesn't fly in a pharmaceutical plant. Assuming someone else is covering a step can lead to a catastrophic contamination event. There can be no gaps in responsibility and no unexplained overlaps that might cause confusion on the factory floor.
Okay, Section 5, Validating Facilities and Equipment.
You hear the word validation thrown around a ton in this industry, but qualification is really the bedrock. Qualification is the rigorous action of establishing documented, undeniable evidence that a specific machine, or a sterile cleanroom, or a massive water purification system does exactly what it is supposed to do every single time you turn it on.
And this qualification process follows a very strict chronological cycle. You can't just buy a multi-million-dollar machine, plug it in, and start making pills. First, you have to prove the initial design meets GMP requirements. That's design qualification. Then you prove it was installed correctly against the blueprints, installation qualification. Next, you prove it operates within its specific limits while completely empty, operational qualification. And finally, performance qualification proves it consistently does the job when you're actually running the real pharmaceutical product through it.
Finally, we hit Section 6, Quality Control and Release.
As we mentioned, quality control is essentially the ultimate gatekeeper of patient safety. Now, they don't just run lab tests, though, of course, that's a massive part of it. They use meticulous sampling to check the final product against strict specifications, but they also evaluate the batch manufacturing records line by line, basically playing detective to ensure every single step of the process was followed perfectly by the production team.
And at the very end of the line, one specific, highly qualified individual, referred to in the WHO guidelines as the authorized person, has to legally sign their name on the batch. By signing, they are personally verifying that the entire set of Russian nesting dolls we've talked about today, from that broad PQS system all the way down to the specific QC tests, has been followed flawlessly for that specific batch of medicine.
As we wrap up this explainer, it's important to remember that WHO good manufacturing practices are never static. They are a constantly evolving, living shield designed entirely to keep you safe. But as we look toward a future filled with hyper-personalized medicine and incredibly complex targeted therapies, the sheer volume of manufacturing data is going to explode. So it leaves us with a pretty big question. How will these rigorous foundational standards adapt to the incredible medical breakthroughs of tomorrow? Thanks for joining me today, and as always, keep questioning how the world around you works.